I'm telling the story Two of Everything, a Chinese folktale retold by author and illustrator Lily Toy Hong. Once, long ago, in a humble little hut, lived Mr. Hack-Tack and his wife, Mrs. Hack-Tack. They were old and very poor, and what little they ate came from their tiny garden. In a lucky year, when the harvest was plentiful, Mr. Hack-Tack had a little extra to take to the village, and there he would trade turnips, potatoes, and other vegetables for clothing, lamp oil, and fresh seeds. One spring morning, when Mr. Hack-Tack was digging in his garden, his shovel struck something hard. Puzzled, Mr. Hack-Tack began to dig deeper into the dark ground until he came upon an ancient pot made of brass. How odd, thought Mr. Hack-Tack to himself, to think I've been digging here all these years and never came upon this pot before. I'll take it home. Maybe Mrs. Hack-Tack can find some use for it. But the pot was big and heavy for old Mr. Hack-Tack, and as he stumbled along, his purse, which contained his last 5 gold coins, fell to the ground. He picked it up and tossed it into the pot for safekeeping and staggered home. His wife greeted him at the door. "Dear husband, what a strange pot." Mr. Hack-Tack explained how he found it. "Well, I wonder what we can do with it," she said. "It looks too large to cook in and too small to bathe in." And she leaned over to peer into the pot, and her hairpin, the only one she owned, fell in. Mrs. Hack-Tack felt inside the pot, and suddenly her eyes grew round with surprise. "Look," she shouted, "I've pulled out 2 hairpins exactly alike, and 2 purses too." And inside each purse were 5 gold coins. Mr. Hack-Tack was so excited he began to jump up and down. "Let's put my winter coat into the pot. If we're lucky again, it will make 2 coats, and then we will both stay warm." So into the pot went 1 coat, and out came 2 coats. They quickly began to search around the house for more things to put into the magical pot. Mrs. Hack-Tack smiled. "I know how we can get anything we want," she said. She took one of the purses and put 10 coins and tossed it into the pot. She pulled out 2 purses with 10 coins in each. "What a clever wife I have," said Mr. Hack-Tack. "Each time we do this, we'll have twice as much money as before." So the Hack-Tacks worked late into the night, filling and emptying the pot until their floor was covered with gold coins. Morning came, and off went Mr. Hack-Tack with a long list of things to buy in the village. And instead of vegetables, his basket was filled with gold coins. Mrs. Hack-Tack stayed home and finished her chores, and after she finished her chores, she sat down to enjoy a cup of tea. And as she sipped her tea, she sat back and she admired that brass pot. She said, "Dear pot, I don't know where you came from, but you are my best friend." And then she knelt with a grateful heart and embraced the pot. And at that very moment, Mr. Hack-Tack returned. His arms were so full of packages, he had to kick the door open. Bang! Mrs. Hack-Tack was startled, and she fell head first into the pot. Mr. Hack-Tack ran over to help his wife. He pulled her legs, he pulled and he tugged until she slid out onto the floor. But when he looked at the pot, there were 2 more legs sticking out of it. So naturally, he went over to the pot and pulled out the second person. She looked exactly like his wife. The new Mrs. Hack-Tack sat on the floor, looking lost and confused. But the first Mrs. Hack-Tack cried, "I am your one and only wife. You put that woman back in the pot right "No," said Mr. Hack-Tack. "If I put her back, we'll not have 2 women, but 3, and 1 wife is enough for me." And as Mr. Hack-Tack backed away from his angry wife, he tripped and he fell headfirst into the pot. Both Mrs. Hack-Tacks rushed over to rescue him. Each grabbed a leg, and they pulled him out onto the floor. There was another Mr. Hack-Tack, and so they pulled out the second Mr. Hack-Tack too. "Just what use does one Mr. Hack-Tack have for another? This pot is not as wonderful as we once thought it to be," said Mr. Hack-Tack angrily. "Calm down," said Mrs. Hack-Tack. "Maybe it's good that the new Mrs. Hack-Tack has her own Mr. Hack-Tack. And with our pot, we can make 2 of everything, so there'd be plenty to go around." So that is exactly what they did. With their magical pot, the Hack-Tacks built 2 fine new homes. Each home had identical teapots, rice bowls, silk embroideries, and bamboo furniture. From the outside, the houses looked identical, but there was one difference. Hidden inside one house was a big brass pot. The neighbors thought the Hack-Tacks had grown so rich that they decided to have 2 of everything, even themselves. The end.